In the opening weeks of 2026, a seismic transformation in global economic power has become impossible to ignore. The numbers tell a story that Washington never anticipated unfolding this quickly. China's trade surplus reached a record $1.2 trillion in 2025, the largest in the history of global commerce. The nation's electricity consumption surpassed 10 trillion kilowatt-hours for the first time, more than double that of the United States and exceeding the combined power usage of the European Union, Russia, India, and Japan. These are not merely statistics. They represent a fundamental realignment of global economic gravity, one that has caught American policymakers off guard and left traditional Western alliances scrambling to respond. The transformation has been building for years, but 2025 marked the inflection point when accumulated changes crystallized into an undeniable new reality. The State Grid Corporation of China now expects to invest 4 trillion yuan, approximately $574 billion, in fixed assets during the 15th five-year plan period, running from 2026 through 2030. This represents a 40% increase compared with the previous cycle. Such massive infrastructure spending dwarfs comparable American investments and signals Beijing's confidence in continued expansion. What makes this shift so significant for American viewers is not simply China's rise in isolation. The concerning element lies in how comprehensively Beijing has positioned itself across the strategic industries that will define the coming decades. From batteries to solar panels, from electric vehicles to rare earth minerals, from artificial intelligence infrastructure to global trade networks, Chinese dominance has reached levels that few anticipated even 5 years ago. The surge in Chinese electricity demand reflects concentrated investment in high-end manufacturing and rapid adoption of electric vehicles and artificial intelligence infrastructure. Power demand for wind equipment manufacturing increased 30% in 2025. Electric vehicle production drove power consumption increases of 20%. Meanwhile, traditional heavy industries saw growth slow to just 1.8%, indicating the structural transformation of the Chinese economy toward higher value production. For Americans accustomed to viewing their nation as the indispensable power in global affairs, these developments require serious reconsideration of assumptions that have guided policy for decades. The question facing Washington is no longer whether China can challenge American primacy, but how to manage a world where that challenge has already succeeded across multiple strategic domains. The term electrostate has entered the vocabulary of energy analysts to describe what China has become. This concept captures something profound about the nature of modern power. Just as petrostates derived geopolitical influence from oil reserves, China has constructed an economy powered by and exporting the technologies of electrification. The scale of this transformation defies easy comprehension. Chinese manufacturers control approximately 80% of the global solar panel supply chain, from raw polysilicon to finished modules. 6 Chinese battery manufacturers controlled 69% of all electric vehicle battery installations worldwide in 2025. The nation added more solar capacity in the first half of 2025 than the rest of the world combined, making up 67% of global solar installations during that period. Wind and solar electricity generation rose 27% in the first half of 2025 compared with the same period in 2024. This growth proved sufficient to cut fossil fuel generation by 2%, marking a significant milestone in China's energy transition. Wind and solar power now account for approximately 22% of national electricity consumption, with targets to reach 25% non-fossil energy by 2030. Battery storage investment in China rose 69% between the first half of 2024 and the first half of 2025. Grid investment increased 22% during the same period. These investments create infrastructure that will lock in Chinese advantages for decades. The strategic implications extend far beyond manufacturing statistics. When a single nation controls such dominant positions across the entire clean energy value chain, it gains leverage that transcends traditional economic competition. Beijing has demonstrated willingness to use export controls as diplomatic instruments, restricting rare earth materials and critical minerals when geopolitical tensions escalate. Chinese companies now lodge approximately 75% of global clean energy patent applications. In the year 2000, that figure stood at just 5%. This intellectual property dominance ensures that even as other nations attempt to build alternative supply chains, they must contend with Chinese technological leadership. American defense contractors have felt this reality acutely. Reports indicate that up to 30% of Pentagon initiatives, including the F-35 fighter jet avionics systems, could face potential delays from rare earth material shortages. Boeing has encountered assembly challenges due to component constraints. The technology giants of Silicon Valley, including NVIDIA, Intel, and Apple, face rising costs and potential production delays as supply chain vulnerabilities become apparent. Contemporary Amperex Technology Company Limited, known as CATL, has become the dominant force in global battery manufacturing. The Chinese company controlled 38% of the worldwide electric vehicle battery market through October 2025, maintaining its position as the only supplier exceeding 30% market share globally. Combined with BYD, the second largest manufacturer, Chinese companies supplied 55% of all electric vehicle batteries worldwide. This dominance extends beyond market share. CATL has announced plans for large-scale deployment of sodium-ion battery technology by the end of 2026, representing the next generation of energy storage that reduces dependence on lithium resources. The company's batteries have become the first globally to meet China's new safety standards, reinforcing its technological leadership. The implications for American automakers are stark. General Motors, Ford, and other domestic manufacturers find themselves dependent on Chinese battery technology for their electric vehicle ambitions. While efforts to build domestic supply chains have accelerated under both the Biden and Trump administrations, the timeline for achieving meaningful independence extends years into the future. Battery technology represents more than automotive applications. Grid-scale energy storage, essential for renewable energy integration, increasingly relies on Chinese manufacturing. The nation's investment in battery storage rose 69% in the first half of 2025 alone, positioning Chinese companies to dominate this emerging market as well. Chinese automakers sold approximately 27 million vehicles globally in 2025, surpassing Japan for the first time in over 2 decades. This milestone represents more than commercial success. It signals the arrival of China as a full-spectrum automotive superpower, competing across every segment from economy cars to luxury vehicles. The domestic Chinese market has crossed a remarkable threshold. More than 50% of new passenger vehicles sold in China in 2025 were electric or plug-in hybrid models. This penetration rate far exceeds any other major market, creating a massive domestic base from which Chinese manufacturers can refine their products before international expansion. In November 2025 alone, electric vehicle charging and battery swap power consumption surged 48.8% year over year. Tesla CEO Elon Musk acknowledged the competitive challenge in January earnings remarks, stating that Chinese car companies are the most competitive in the world and that without trade barriers, they will demolish most other companies globally. Former Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares predicted that Tesla itself will end up completely overtaken by Chinese manufacturers. Chinese electric vehicle exports increased 87% year over year through the end of 2025. Markets from Southeast Asia to Latin America to Africa have welcomed affordable Chinese vehicles that offer features and quality that legacy automakers struggle to match at comparable price points. BYD, the world's largest electric vehicle manufacturer, exported more than 131,000 cars in November alone, 4 of the 10 largest value markets for Chinese electric vehicle exports in 2025 were outside the OECD: Brazil, Mexico, the United Arab Emirates, and Indonesia. Vietnam has doubled its electric vehicle sales share since 2024 to reach close to 40%, overtaking the United Kingdom and the European Union for sales penetration. Thailand has exceeded 20% electric vehicle market share for the first time. The response from traditional automotive powers has been defensive. The United States and Canada imposed tariffs exceeding 100% on Chinese electric vehicle imports. The European Union implemented countervailing duties targeting alleged manufacturing subsidies. Brazil and Mexico have raised barriers. Yet Chinese manufacturers have adapted by establishing overseas production facilities, with capacity expected to nearly double to over 4 million vehicles annually by 2026. BYD began shipping production equipment to its new plant in Hungary in late 2025, with trial production expected in early 2026. This localization strategy allows Chinese brands to sidestep import duties while embedding themselves deeper into regional supply chains, raising raising competitive pressure on European manufacturers already struggling with cost constraints and slower innovation cycles. China's control over rare earth elements represents perhaps its most potent strategic asset. These 17 elements, essential for everything from smartphones to missile guidance systems, remain overwhelmingly processed in China despite global efforts to diversify supply chains. The escalation in October 2025 demonstrated this leverage dramatically. Beijing announced export licensing requirements on rare earth oxides, metals, and magnet products in response to American semiconductor export controls. The announcement included unprecedented extraterritorial provisions requiring Chinese nationals to obtain approval before engaging in overseas rare earth activities. The Trump administration negotiated a temporary suspension of these controls through November 2026, but the fundamental vulnerability remains. American defense programs, including the F-35 and numerous other weapons systems, depend on materials that China can restrict with immediate effect. The Department of Defense estimates that years of work remain before domestic supply chains can reduce this dependency meaningfully. Efforts to build alternative sources have accelerated. The Commerce Department took an equity stake in USA Rare Earth in January 2026, part of an unconventional approach to building domestic capacity. Mountain Pass in California, Lynas USA's refinery in Texas, and Energy Fuels operations in Utah represent growing but still modest alternatives. A G7 ministerial meeting in Washington in early 2026 focused specifically on rare earth supply chain resilience. Yet the timeline for meaningful diversification extends to 2028 at the earliest for many critical materials. Australia's Lynas Rare Earths, the largest producer of separated rare earths outside China, still sends materials to China for refining. The technology and expertise gap remains substantial. The competition between American and Chinese artificial intelligence capabilities has intensified throughout 2025 and into 2026. Chinese President Xi Jinping declared in his New Year address that 2025 represented a breakthrough year for domestic chips and artificial intelligence, with many large models competing to reach new heights. American export controls have created challenges for Chinese artificial intelligence development, but have not halted progress. Huawei's Ascend chips, while performing approximately 60 to 70%, as well as NVIDIA's most advanced offerings on some workloads, represent meaningful domestic capability. Chinese researchers have narrowed the performance gap between domestic and American artificial intelligence models from 3 years in 2023 to approximately 6 to 12 months by 2025. DeepSeek, a Chinese artificial intelligence company, has rattled Western technology circles with innovations in algorithmic efficiency that partially compensate for hardware constraints. The potential collaboration between such companies and Huawei's chip ecosystem threatens NVIDIA's software dominance, particularly as inference tasks, expected to account for 70% of artificial intelligence computing demand by 2026, become more prominent. The irony of American policy has not escaped analysts. Export controls designed to slow Chinese progress have accelerated domestic substitution efforts, pushed development of alternative chip architectures, and forced more efficient use of available computing resources. China's artificial intelligence companies have adopted more compute-efficient strategies that may prove advantageous as the industry matures. China's Belt and Road Initiative recorded its highest engagement ever in the first half of 2025, with $123 billion in deals spanning construction contracts and investments. This record-breaking performance defied predictions that the initiative had peaked or was retreating. Africa, Central Asia, and the Middle East attracted over two-thirds of this engagement. Nigeria's Ogidigban gas-centered industrial park alone accounted for $20 billion in investment. Record green energy investments of $9.7 billion reflected Chinese manufacturers seeking overseas markets amid domestic competition. The initiative has evolved from its earlier emphasis on large-scale infrastructure loans to smaller, smarter projects that embed China in the infrastructure and energy ecosystems of partner nations. A cargo train from Western China reached Chancay, Peru in July 2025, symbolic of China's strategy to build logistical networks across Latin America's Pacific coast. Brazil and China signed a memorandum of understanding to explore a 4,500-kilometer transcontinental railway connecting Pacific and Atlantic ports. Such projects position Beijing to reshape trade routes in ways that reduce American influence across the global south. The contrast with American engagement has become stark. The Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, the American-led alternative to Belt and Road, remains underpowered. Washington continues to prioritize military alignment over sustained civilian infrastructure engagement, leaving a vacuum that Chinese investment fills. The renminbi has steadily expanded its global role, though replacing dollar dominance remains a distant prospect. According to the People's Bank of China, the renminbi has become the world's third most used currency for trade financing and settlement, the third most used currency for cross-border payments, and holds the third largest weight in the International Monetary Fund's special drawing rights basket. China's cross-border interbank payment system has expanded to 1,467 indirect participants across 119 countries, linking 4,800 banks in 185 nations. While still smaller than SWIFT, this infrastructure provides an alternative that reduces vulnerability to American financial sanctions. The digital yuan has processed more than 3.4 billion transactions worth approximately $2.3 trillion through the end of 2025, representing an 800% increase from 2023. China established both domestic and international operations centers for the digital currency, signaling ambitions that extend beyond domestic payment efficiency. These initiatives aim not to displace the dollar entirely, but to reduce exposure to what Chinese officials describe as dollar weaponization. Bilateral currency swap agreements with over 30 Belt and Road countries and renminbi clearing arrangements in 19 nations create parallel financial infrastructure that limits American leverage. American tariff policy under the second Trump administration represented the most significant trade action in nearly a century. The average effective tariff rate rose from approximately 2.5% in late 2024 to 16.8% by November 2025, the highest level since 1946. Tariff revenue reached $287 billion in 2025, a 192% increase from 2024. The escalation with China proved particularly intense. Reciprocal tariffs reached 145% at their peak, effectively constituting a trade embargo before negotiations produced a temporary truce through November 2026. Current effective tariff rates on Chinese goods remain above 47%, levels that experts consider too high for many Chinese exporters to operate profitably in the American market. The tariff confrontation followed a pattern of escalation and partial de-escalation. President Trump initially imposed 10% tariffs in February 2025, framing the action as pressure on China regarding fentanyl flows. By April, reciprocal tariffs had risen to 125% following retaliatory actions from Beijing. A meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi in South Korea in late October produced a one-year extension of reduced tariff rates through November 2026. Under the agreement, China suspended implementation of expansive rare earth export controls and agreed to issue general licenses for exports of rare earths, gallium, germanium, antimony, and graphite to American end users. Beijing also committed to measures addressing fentanyl flows to the United States and suspended retaliatory tariffs on American agricultural products, including chicken, wheat, corn, cotton, soybeans, pork, and beef. The results have been mixed from the American perspective. Imports from China declined 27% during the first 10 months of 2025, the largest bilateral decline observed among trading partners. However, this reduction came with significant costs for American consumers and businesses, and trade simply redirected to alternative suppliers. The Tax Foundation estimates that Trump's tariffs will raise federal revenue by $175 billion in 2026, but reduce gross domestic product by 0.5% before accounting for foreign retaliation. The average American household faces an effective tax increase of approximately $1,300 in 2026 through higher prices. Evidence suggests tariff costs have largely passed through to wholesale and retail prices. Meanwhile, China's total trade surplus expanded to record levels as exports shifted to alternative markets. Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa all recorded faster export growth than the overall rate. Chinese companies have proven more adaptable than American policymakers anticipated, finding new customers to replace constrained American demand. The emerging global order presents American policymakers with uncomfortable choices. The clean energy transition, essential for addressing climate change, depends substantially on Chinese manufacturing capacity. Restricting access to Chinese technology slows American progress toward emission reduction goals while doing little to prevent Chinese dominance from consolidating. Defense supply chains face vulnerabilities that cannot be resolved quickly. The timeline for building domestic rare earth processing, advanced battery manufacturing, and related capabilities extends years beyond current planning horizons. In the interim, American military programs remain exposed to potential disruption. The technology competition presents similar tensions. Export controls that deny Chinese companies access to advanced semiconductors accelerate domestic substitution efforts that may ultimately reduce long-term American leverage. Meanwhile, Chinese artificial intelligence companies gain competitive advantages through necessity-driven efficiency improvements. Trade policy designed to reduce Chinese economic influence has instead prompted supply chain reorganization that leaves America increasingly isolated from global manufacturing networks. Countries that might have aligned with American positions instead hedge their bets, maintaining relationships with Beijing while accepting Washington's preferences where convenient. Analysts suggest that American strategy requires fundamental recalibration. The challenge is not to contain China, but to adapt to a structural reality where Chinese economic power represents a permanent feature of the international landscape. Targeted balancing and selective cooperation may prove more effective than comprehensive confrontation. Investment in domestic capacity across critical sectors must accelerate substantially beyond current levels. The $52 billion allocated through the CHIPS Act, while significant, pales against the $450 billion that 5 American technology companies alone plan to spend on artificial intelligence infrastructure in 2026. Alliance management requires sustained attention. The Netherlands, Japan, and South Korea question why they should maintain semiconductor equipment export controls when American companies sell finished chips to Chinese markets. Coordinated policy depends on perceived equity in burden sharing that current arrangements may not provide. The clean energy transition presents particular urgency. Chinese solar panels and batteries offer the most cost-effective path to reducing emissions, yet dependence on these technologies creates strategic vulnerabilities. Balancing climate imperatives against security concerns will require policy creativity that current frameworks struggle to provide. The global power shift, evident in early 2026, represents more than economic competition between two nations. It reflects a fundamental transformation in how international influence operates in the 21st century. Control over clean energy supply chains, critical minerals, advanced manufacturing, and digital infrastructure has become as strategically significant as military capability. China's emergence as the world's first electrostate creates dependencies that extend across virtually every sector of modern economies. American consumers benefit from affordable solar panels and electric vehicles, while American policymakers worry about supply chain vulnerabilities that could prove crippling in moments of crisis. The $1.2 trillion trade surplus, the dominance across battery and solar manufacturing, the expanding Belt and Road networks, and the growing alternative financial infrastructure represent accumulated advantages that cannot be quickly reversed. American response requires acknowledging this reality while developing strategies that protect essential interests without foreclosing beneficial engagement. The coming years will determine whether this power shift produces competitive coexistence or confrontational escalation. The choices made by policymakers in Washington and Beijing, along with leaders across Europe, Asia, and the global South, will shape international order for decades to come. For American viewers, understanding these dynamics has never been more important. The world is changing, and the United States must adapt to changes it can no longer prevent.